12 years, 4,380 days. That is how long she bled. Imagine waking up every single morning, weak, dizzy, and in pain, knowing that today will be exactly the same as yesterday. But the physical pain wasn't even the worst part. In her world, her condition didn't just make her sick. It made her a pariah. She was legally unclean. No hugs from friends, no sitting at the dinner table with family, no worship in the temple. She was a ghost haunting the edges of her own life, slowly draining away, physically and socially. She had spent every penny she owned on doctors who promised cures, but only delivered more suffering. She was broke. She was dying. She was hopeless. And then, in a single, terrifying, split-second decision, she reached out her hand, and the history of medicine, the laws of nature, and the rules of religion were all rewritten in a heartbeat. Most people hear that story and think it's a nice fable from a dusty, ancient book. They think miracles like that, instant biological rewrites of the human body, are things that belong to the ancient past. They don't happen in the age of MRIs, neurosurgery, and genetic mapping. But what if that's wrong? What if the exact same power that stopped a hemorrhage in 1st century Galilee is walking into hospital rooms right now? We are about to dive into 2 stories. One you think you know, and one you definitely don't. A story of a modern woman whose body was twisted beyond recognition by a disease science calls incurable until. A Christmas Eve shock that left doctors at the Mayo Clinic speechless. This is an investigation into the impossible. To understand the stakes, we have to transport ourselves back to the heat and the dust of a street in Capernaum. It's chaotic. Jesus of Nazareth is moving through the town, and the crowd is suffocating. It's a wall of bodies, shoulders rubbing against shoulders, shouting, pushing. And down on the ground, likely crawling to stay hidden, is the woman we just talked about. We don't know her name. We just know her desperation. You have to understand the risk she was taking. This wasn't just a sick woman looking for a doctor. Under Levitical law, if she touched a holy man like Jesus, she would be making him ritually unclean. If the crowd caught her, they could stone her. She was risking her life for a theory, and her theory was simple, almost childlike in its logic. If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Not a conversation, not a prayer, just contact. She spots him. She fights through the legs of the crowd, the dust choking her, her heart hammering against her ribs. She reaches out a trembling hand. Her fingers brush the rough fabric of his prayer shawl. The tzitzit, boom. Instantly. The Bible describes it as a sensation of power going out. The bleeding didn't slow down. It stopped. The chronic pain that had been the background noise of her life for a decade vanished. She felt a rush of vitality she hadn't felt in 12 years. But then, the music stops. Jesus halts the entire procession. He asks, "Who touched me?" This is the moment of terror. She's been caught. She falls at his feet, shaking, expecting rebuke, expecting to be shamed. But Jesus does something profound. He doesn't focus on the physical miracle. He focuses on the engine behind it. He looks at this woman, who hasn't been looked in the eye for years, and calls her daughter. He says, "Your faith has healed you." He identified the variable. It wasn't magic. It was a specific, desperate, an active kind of faith. A faith that acted in spite of the facts. But that was then. That was a world of sandals and superstition, right? Let's fast forward 2,000 years to Minnesota. Let's talk about Emma McKinley. For most of her life, Emma was the person giving the help. She was active, vibrant, a caregiver. But in 1993, a workplace accident changed the trajectory of her existence. She fell from a storage loft. The trauma triggered a condition known as reflex sympathetic dystrophy, or RSD. Today, it's often called complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS. If you look up CRPS on the McGill Pain Index, which rates pain levels from a bee sting to amputation, CRPS scores higher than childbirth. It scores higher than losing a finger. It is often nicknamed the suicide disease because the pain is so relentless and severe that many patients simply cannot endure it. For Emma, the wind blowing across her skin felt like a blowtorch. But the disease didn't stop at pain. It began to physically twist her body. Over the next 18 years, Emma McKinley's body turned against her. Her left hand clenched into a tight, immovable fist. Her foot curled inward. Her spine began to twist until she was permanently bent over at a nearly 90-degree angle. She was confined to a wheelchair, unable to straighten up, unable to walk, living in a constant state of 10 out of 10 agony. She went to the Mayo Clinic. These are the best doctors in the world. They ran the tests, they tried the therapies, and eventually they gave her the news that no one wants to hear. This is permanent. The damage is irreversible. In fact, to manage the pain, they suggested amputating her legs. Think about that. 18 years. That's longer than the woman in the Bible. Emma watched her life shrink down to the size of a wheelchair. But like the woman in the crowd, Emma possessed a stubborn, illogical defiance. She refused the amputation. She said, "I have that much faith in my Jesus to know that someday he is going to give me that healing." Year after year passed. Nothing happened. The pain stayed. The body remained twisted. Until Christmas Eve, 2011. It started as a nightmare. Emma was alone at home. She reached for something. Her wheelchair tipped, and she fell hard onto the floor. She was trapped. Because of her spinal curvature and her paralysis, she physically could not get up. She lay there on the floor in the dark, in excruciating pain, for 8 hours. It was the breaking point. She cried out. She screamed out to God. And in the early hours of Christmas morning, the room changed. Emma describes seeing a blinding white robe. She didn't see a face, just the brilliance of the garment. It's a poetic echo of the biblical story, the hem of the robe again. She says Jesus entered the room. He reached down and touched her clenched fist, the hand that hadn't opened in nearly 2 decades. He watched as her fingers, fused by years of atrophy, simply opened. Then, she says, he helped her stand. She felt her spine, twisted at 90 degrees, snap straight. She felt her feet flatten against the floor. The pain, the fire that had burned her for 6,570 days, was extinguished instantly. The next morning, her children and grandchildren came over to open presents. They walked in expecting to see Grandma in her chair. Instead, they found her walking around the kitchen, making coffee. The shock was absolute. They were seeing a ghost come back to life. The medical records tell the story. Dr. C. Robert Stanhope from the Mayo Clinic, a man of science, looked at the before and after. He looked at the x-rays of a twisted spine and the woman standing straight in front of him. His conclusion? He said, "What happened to Emma is simply not explainable from a medical perspective. The only explanation has to be that God intervened." Here is the connection we cannot miss. 2 women, one in ancient Galilee, one in modern Minnesota, one bleeding, one paralyzed. Both declared hopeless by the experts of their time, both stripped of their quality of life, but both of them did something radical. They didn't accept the diagnosis as the final word. They didn't view their reality as the ultimate truth. They viewed it as a temporary condition, subject to a higher authority. The woman in the crowd pushed through the physical barrier of the mob. Emma McKinley pushed through the temporal barrier of 18 years of silence. Jesus told the woman, "Your faith has healed you." It wasn't a passive wish. It was a violent, desperate, beautiful grab for the impossible. These stories aren't just for comfort. They are a challenge. They force us to ask a difficult question. What dead end are we staring at right now? What diagnosis, what relationship, what financial disaster have we accepted as permanent? The evidence suggests that the power to rewrite reality is still active. It suggests that the variable isn't whether God is able, but whether we are willing to reach out through the crowd, through the pain, through the years of silence, and touch the hem of the garment. The physics of faith haven't changed. The invitation is still open. If you know someone who needs to hear that the impossible is still possible, share this video with them right now. And if you have a story, a moment where the doctors were wrong, where the bank account didn't make sense, where the rescue came out of nowhere, you need to write it in the comments below. Your testimony might be the spark that someone else needs to keep fighting for one more day. I'll see you in the next one.